Fined over a fence, but I wasn't in her HOA. I fought back. She lost everything. My name is Elijah Brooks, and I never planned to be anyone's hero. When I bought my small craftsman house in Pinecrest Valley, it felt like finally breathing after years of struggling in the noise and chaos of city life. I had left behind a high-stress job, a failed marriage, and a cracked sense of peace in my own skin. I thought moving to a quiet suburb would help me stitch those pieces back together. What I didn't know was that this place had its own kind of chaos, one that wore pastel cardigans and smiled while it destroyed you. I had been here exactly 16 days when it began. I was painting the rebuilt fence at the back of my property, just a simple boundary to keep my dog, Rufus, from wandering into the gully behind the houses when a sharp voice cracked through the air like a whip. "Excuse me, you can't just put up a fence without approval." I turned. A tall woman with tightly curled blonde hair and oversized sunglasses stood at the edge of my lawn, one foot planted firmly on my driveway, as if it were her territory. "I'm sorry," I asked, lowering the roller. "Your fence. It violates HOA Code Section 7.4. She said it like a cop announcing a felony. "You'll be fined until it's removed. $500 a day." "I'm not in the HOA, I said carefully, wiping sweat from my brow. "I checked before I bought. My house is on an older lot outside the HOA boundaries." She gave me a tight, sour smile. "That's what you think." Her name, I later learned, was Karen Templeton, president of the Pinecrest Valley Homeowners Association, self-appointed enforcer, judge, jury, social executioner. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. The next morning, a printed notice was taped to my door. "You are in violation of HOA code. Remove unauthorized fencing or pay daily fine $500 day." There was no letterhead, no address, just a P.O. box and an email that bounced back when I tried to reply. I went to the county records office that afternoon. Sure enough, my lot and three others along my side of the street were excluded from the HOA map. I wasn't crazy. I took pictures of the county documents, emailed what I found to the HOA. No response. Instead, a week later, I received a certified letter demanding $3,500 in unpaid fines and threatening a lien on my property. That's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was war. I used to think neighbor disputes were the stuff of sitcoms bickering over lawn height, or who borrowed whose rake. Nothing like this. Nothing so orchestrated, so aggressive. By the second week, Karen wasn't just sending letters. She had a clipboard and a camera. I caught her taking pictures of my backyard at 6:15 am, standing right at the edge of my property line like some suburban sentry. Rufus barked furiously from inside the house, and I stormed out barefoot onto the dew-slick grass. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep calm. "You need to remove the fence. Elijah, this is your final warning." Her voice was cool, clipped, a practiced blend of condescension and threat. "You have no jurisdiction over this property," I told her, holding up a printed copy of the county boundary map. "You're not my HOA." She didn't even glance at it. "Your attitude's been noted," she replied, then turned on her heel. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about offense. It was about control. She had decided I was out of line, and she was going to punish me for not submitting. The next day, I found a violation sign staked into my yard. Bright red, block letters, visible from the street. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was damaging. People slowed their cars to look. A neighbor I hadn't met yet, a woman named Sylvia who lived 2 doors down, whispered to me later that Karen had already warned others not to engage with me because I was non-compliant. The alienation set in fast. No one waved anymore. Kids avoided walking near my side of the street. Someone even left a dog turd in my mailbox. But the worst part, I was starting to feel like maybe I was the problem. That's how gaslighting works. You hear the same lies so often. They start to echo in your own head. Until the day I found my water meter tampered with. My water bill tripled in one cycle. When I had the city come out to inspect, the technician knelt down and shook his head. "This meter's been opened," he said. "See the scratch marks? Someone tried to restrict the valve." then gave up. I stared at the meter in silence, the air suddenly heavier. It was more than harassment now. It was sabotage. The final straw came a few days later, when I returned from work to find the fence slashed. Not just one panel, but four, hacked clean through with what looked like a saw. Rufus was gone. I found him 2 hours later, wet and trembling near the storm drain at the end of the street. A car could have hit him. He could have been lost forever. I carried him home, soaked and shaking with rage. I wasn't going to roll over anymore. Karen had made a critical mistake. She assumed I was alone. That night, I made a plan. I documented everything. The fake fines, the signs, the mail tampering, the camera footage of her snooping at dawn. I backed it all up in 3 cloud folders and a hard drive. Then I printed the county parcel maps, highlighted the boundaries, and scheduled an appointment with a real estate attorney. His name was Marcus Valdez. He was sharp, methodical, and utterly unfazed by Karen's theatrics. "You're not the first person she's tried this with," he said, glancing at my evidence, "but you might be the first to fight back this hard and win." It turned out, Karen had been operating in a very gray legal zone, claiming expanded HOA rights over homes never formally signed into the covenant. She'd done this for years, mostly targeting elderly homeowners or newcomers, too overwhelmed to challenge her. I was the crack in her system. Marcus helped me draft a cease and desist letter backed by state law. We included a formal complaint to the county HOA oversight board, but we didn't send it yet, because something wasn't adding up. There were too many people too scared to talk. Even Sylvia, who had briefly reached out, backed off when I asked her to share what she knew. She texted once more, "Please don't involve me. You don't know what she's capable of." What was Karen capable of? It was a Thursday morning when I finally got the first real clue. While walking Rufus, I saw an older man struggling to pull weeds on the corner property, Mr. Haverford. I stopped to help. After a bit of small talk, I asked him if he'd ever had issues with Karen. He dropped his voice. "You're the one with the fence, huh? Listen, just be careful. I tried to paint my shutters blue last year. Not even neon blue, just sky blue. Next week I had a letter from a code enforcement division that doesn't exist. She tells everyone she has city ties. She forged a letterhead." He nodded. "That fence of yours. It's not about fences. It's about fear. And she's used it to control this neighborhood for years." That's when the pattern started to click. Karen's power didn't come from legal authority. It came from manipulation, fear, and a lot of people who didn't know their rights or felt too isolated to defend them. But I had evidence. I had legal help. And I was done being quiet. Karen Templeton had spent years building an empire out of empty threats. But her downfall began the moment I decided to stop playing defense. After hearing from Mr. Haverford, I started digging deeper. I canvassed the street on foot, one neighbor at a time. Most still avoided me, some shut the door without a word, but a few began to crack. One night, Sylvia knocked on my door. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder like someone might be watching. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "But what you said about the fence, it happened to us too." She came inside, sat with her hands clenched around a chipped coffee mug while Rufus lay beside her. Her story poured out in fragments, like she was emptying a decade of silence. Karen told us we had to pay a mandatory beautification fee when we moved in. Said the HOA had the power to assess property value damages if we didn't comply. We paid her $3,000 in cash. My stomach sank. "Did you ever get receipts?" She shook her head. "Just emails. And now those are gone." Over the next few days, 3 more neighbors came forward. An elderly widow named Maria, who said Karen threatened her with emergency fines unless she tore out her rose bushes. A young couple, Sean and Priya, who had been told they couldn't rent out their guest house without board approval, even though there was no clause in their deed saying so. Karen had weaponized the HOA like a mob racket. But here was the thing, she didn't even have a board. I filed a request with the county clerk for all registered HOA documentation tied to Pinecrest Valley. There were supposed to be annual minutes, public officer lists, financial disclosures. What I got back was thin 2 pages of bylaws, last updated in 2008, and a Form 1120H tax filing from 2014. No board names, no active treasurer, no proper elections in over 8 years. Karen had kept the title president without ever being elected. Worse, she had opened a private P.O. box and listed it as the HOA's business address. The account was under her maiden name, buried in a defunct LLC called Pine Valley Community Affairs, which hadn't filed taxes since 2015. She was running a fake HOA within a semi-defunct real one. That's when Marcus said what I was already thinking. This is fraud, real, provable fraud. She's extorted thousands, maybe tens of thousands. If you want to blow this open, now's the time. I did, and I wasn't going to do it quietly. We began assembling the case, bit by bit, testimonies, bank statements, old notices with no legal code cited. But to bring this to light, I needed to go public. So, I turned to social media. I created a page called Karen versus the Neighborhood and posted a video. I stood in front of my hacked-up fence with county documents in one hand, Rufus at my side. This is my fence. It was slashed open last month. I've been fined $500 a day by a woman who claims to run an HOA I was never part of. But the truth is bigger than that. She's been intimidating this community for years. And we've had enough. I posted screenshots of fake violation letters, the map showing my home outside the HOA boundaries, and blurred interviews from 3 neighbors. Within hours, it had 3,000 views. By morning, 20,000. Then the local paper picked it up. Fake HOA extortion scandal exposed in Pinecrest Valley. And that was the breaking point. Karen went ballistic. She showed up at my house screaming, flanked by 2 men. I'd never seen one of them carrying a clipboard with what looked like a cease and desist letter scrawled on a legal pad. "You're defaming me," she shrieked. "This is libel." I stayed calm, phone recording the whole thing. "Tell it to the judge," I said. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." When the men realized I wasn't backing down and saw I was filming, they left. Karen, on the other hand, planted herself in my yard like a banshee, yelling about community image and slander. The best part, it was all caught on camera and the footage went viral. Over 500,000 views in 2 days. Suddenly, the entire region knew the name Karen Templeton, and they didn't like what they saw. What came next was a wave. County oversight launched an audit of the HOA. The state attorney general's office opened a fraud inquiry. Reporters started contacting me, and not just local ones. NBC, The Washington Post, even a documentary channel wanted to do a piece on HOA abuse. But the most powerful blow came from within the neighborhood. Mr. Haverford, Sylvia, Sean, Priya, and a dozen others signed a joint petition to remove Karen and dissolve the existing HOA. Even though I wasn't technically under its rule, the message was clear. She no longer held power. We held a community meeting in the town center gymnasium. Over 70 people showed up. One by one, they took the mic, sharing what she'd done. Some stories brought people to tears, like the single mom who paid Karen $2,000 in violation penalties just to put up a basketball hoop for her son. By the time it was my turn to speak, the room was humming with emotion. She used fear to build control. I said, but fear only works when people feel alone. We're not alone anymore. We're neighbors. And it's time to take this community back. The applause that followed, it wasn't just loud, it was cathartic. By the time the audit results came back, the truth was undeniable. Karen hadn't just pretended to lead an HOA. She had fabricated it, funneled money through an inactive LLC, and systematically used forged documents to collect nearly $137,000 from residents over the last 6 years. Every fine, every violation letter, every so-called beautification fee was a lie. Not a single penny had gone toward community improvements. It all went to Karen. Vacations, car payments, cosmetic surgery. The most insulting part, she still lived like a queen. Even while others in the neighborhood were struggling to afford groceries and mortgage payments. But karma doesn't always knock politely. It sometimes kicks the door down. The first official blow was civil. The county issued a cease and desist order, preventing her from representing or enforcing any HOA authority, effective immediately. Then came the civil suit, a class action lawsuit filed by 43 homeowners, including several who had moved out but came back to testify. The Attorney General's office added criminal fraud charges, centered around misuse of funds, tax evasion, and mail tampering. She was arrested at 7:34 a.m. on a Friday morning. The video, recorded from across the street by Sean and uploaded under the title "The Fall of Karen Templeton," showed her in a bathrobe, arms stiff behind her back, as two officers led her across her once manicured lawn. The irony: that same week, I received a letter from the real Pinecrest HOA. It had never claimed my house or my side of the street, and it had no affiliation with Karen's self-made empire. The weeks that followed felt surreal. News trucks lined the entrance to our street. Reporters camped out in vans. Neighborhood kids chalked "No More Fake Ho" on the sidewalk in bright neon. A documentary film crew moved into an Airbnb down the block. But under the spotlight, something remarkable started to happen. People began talking again. We had a barbecue, our first real neighborhood gathering in years. Sylvia brought lemon bars. Mr. Haverford played the banjo. Sean and Priya's daughter set up a lemonade stand, and no one asked for a permit. The fear had evaporated. What took its place was community. Karen, meanwhile, tried to claw back power. From county jail, she posted bail with what we later learned was money from one of her hidden accounts. She hired a lawyer, one of those brash, blustering types who makes threats on Twitter, and began filing counterclaims: libel, slander, harassment. She said we had orchestrated a witch hunt, but no one believed her anymore. Every document she submitted was torn apart by attorneys. Every motion was denied. Eventually, she stopped showing up to hearings. Her house was repossessed, her car towed. Even her two rescue cats, who neighbors learned she'd often neglected, were rehomed to loving families. When the state filed its final motion, the words were clear. This individual has shown a pattern of deception, manipulation, and abuse of public trust. She was sentenced to 9 years, with parole eligibility after 4, but the most satisfying moment didn't come in the courtroom. It came the day a county contractor arrived with a flatbed truck to remove Karen's white HOA notice board, the one she had planted at the community entrance like a throne marker. I watched from my driveway as it was hoisted up and dropped onto the truck bed with a satisfying clang. A new sign went up 2 weeks later: Pinecrest Valley, a self-governed neighborhood. We talk. We listen. We decide together. Simple, honest, free. The fence she tried to find me over, it's still up, but now it's painted sky blue, Mr. Haverford's old shutter color, and decorated with little handprints from the kids on our street. I left one panel unpainted. On it, I nailed a small metal plate that reads, "This fence stood when injustice tried to tear it down." And below it, in smaller letters dedicated to everyone who refused to be silent, Karen Templeton was gone, but her shadow lingered. Her fake HOA empire had ruled our neighborhood with intimidation, fear, and manipulation. Now, the air felt different, cleaner somehow, but the work of rebuilding was just beginning. And not just fences and flower beds. We had to rebuild trust. At the first official Pinecrest Town Circle, meeting a name we all voted on, together we filled the old gym again. No podiums, no microphones, just chairs in a big circle and a whiteboard that said, "What do you want this neighborhood to be?" It was a simple question, and for the first time, people didn't argue, they listened. Maria, the widow who had once cried over her ripped-up roses, volunteered to lead a garden project. She was shy at first, but came alive when she described her vision for a pollinator walk on the West Side Trail. Sean offered to turn their detached garage into a tool-sharing library. Priya, his wife, started a street newsletter. Sylvia launched a Sunday walking group for seniors. And me, I got voted into a rotating resident council, no president. Just 5 of us who'd meet every few weeks to mediate concerns and keep things transparent. Not a title I ever wanted, but after everything, I understood its weight. We made a pact: no fines, no threats, no fear. If a fence was off color or a hedge too wild, we'd knock on doors, not send letters. We'd talk, like people, like neighbors. But not everyone was quick to forgive. Some were still bitter. Others refused to join the meetings, convinced something like Karen could happen again. And I didn't blame them. Healing takes time. One afternoon, Rufus and I stopped at Mr. Haverford's house. He was sitting on his porch, strumming that old banjo, the strings out of tune, his voice low but steady. I almost sold this place, he admitted. After what she did, figured it'd never feel like home again. I sat beside him, passed him a bottle of ginger tea, and said nothing. After a long silence, he looked out across the street at the kids racing each other down the sidewalk, their chalk drawings still fresh on the curb. Guess I was wrong, he said softly. It does feel like home again. Better, even. The biggest surprise came 6 months later. A new family moved into Karen's old house. The Reese's young couple with twins and a golden retriever that immediately befriended Rufus. Nervous at first, they'd heard whispers about the house and wanted to know what happened. I told them every chapter, and when I was done, they asked something I never expected. Can we be part of the next council rotation that night? I cried, not out of sadness, but because I realized something that had taken me months to understand. We didn't just remove a tyrant, we reclaimed our story. Now, every year on the same weekend, Karen had once issued her most notorious fence citations. We hold a block party, we call it Fence Fest. There's music, laughter, pie contests, and a quirky tradition where each family decorates a picket fence panel however they want. Some are funny, some artistic. One is just covered in plastic flamingos. Mine's still that same sky blue panel, still that metal plate. But every year, someone adds a new handprint. Kids, parents, new neighbors. It's a wall, yes, but somehow it became our bridge. If you're reading this and you've ever felt bullied by authority, whether it's a fake HOA, a petty tyrant, or someone abusing power, remember this: you're not powerless. Your voice matters. And change always begins when one person says enough. I never wanted to be a fighter, but I'm glad I fought. And I hope, if you ever find yourself standing in front of injustice, trembling, angry, alone, that you'll remember this story and know you're not. You never were. What would you have done in my situation? Was I right to go public, or should I have handled it quietly? Have you seen something like this in your community? Share your thoughts below. Let's talk about power, fear, and what real justice looks like in our neighborhoods.